Step into the shadows with Paranormal M, where haunting mysteries unfold. Don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell for your weekly dose of chills. The adventure begins now. One of 3 of my true paranormal stories. So I'm like 10, maybe 11. Either way, my family had recently moved into this house right at the bottom of the Appalachian Mountains. We bought this house from a widow whose husband passed away in what had been the TV room. But we converted it into a library and a stereo room for a custom setup my dad had built about 4 years ago and I was extremely proud of. My brother, 14 or 15 at the time, and we were military brats. My dad had just retired from Coast Guard, hence why we were living as far away from the ocean as we could. Given that we were under the impression this kind of place is crime-free, and we were used to my brother looking after me, our parents are okay with leaving us home alone. It's a Saturday or something. We're home alone, and I'm kind of at risk of being bored out of my skull. So my brother decides to put on some music. He puts on the Cranberries, his favorite band, starts teaching me to loosen up and just dance. So we're in the music room, dancing to the Cranberries' greatest hits, truly a hit down at the club. And that's when it gets to, I think, linger or free to decide. And I honestly can't remember which. It was about 2000, 2001, so it wasn't the '08 version of their greatest hits. I know it wasn't Zombie. Anyway, my brother and I are dancing when we hear an old man we'd never heard. And it was in the grouchiest voice ever, and he shouted, "Would you turn that crap off?" And we froze, staring at each other. We'd both heard it. Absolutely clear as day. It's as if we'd had this voice in the room with us. We freak out, turn off the music, and we spend the next 2 hours scouring the roughly 2 acres of land that we had for any sign of somebody being there. No sign of any cars, all the windows were closed, no sign that the admittedly unlocked doors had been open. Neither our dog nor our cat was perturbed in any way. Absolutely nothing. We decide that it was a ghost, and joke that it was an old man, the man who had died in that room. My brother decides that the best thing that we can do is show the ghost that this is our house now, and we'll play whatever music we damn well please. We finish the album. Not that much dancing, though. Anyway, we talk about it a couple of times over the next decade or so, once in a while. We got a cool ghost story to tell. Fast forward 12 years. My brother had graduated from college. And I'm in college, having gone through the ringer a couple of times, so I didn't graduate until I was 24. So, 2014, going to college in the upper part of the U.S. It was a dark, snowy night. Going from hanging out eating food at a student center to playing video games on my computer in my dorm. Now, what you have to understand is that I'm very cautious about adopting new tech fads. I don't get a smartphone until after I graduated. That's because it seemed like the technology was moving too fast to be worth the abnormal sums they cost at the time. But an MP3 player, that had been around since I was a teenager. They still made them. So that was one of the few non-essential to my studies pieces of technology that I decided to buy. There's not much storage on it, so I loaded up with some reliable tunes I know I'll love. Eurythmics, Dr. Steele, Long Live the Toy Soldiers, Aerosmith, before I realized I didn't actually like Aerosmith, and about one audiobook at a time. Big into the Dresden Files at that time. And, of course, the Cranberries' greatest hits. It's a dark, snowy night. It's a gentle snowfall. Street lights are just bright enough to navigate. A little spooky, but kind of a romantic kind of way. All in all, I'd had a pretty good day. All things considered, it was a good time in my life. I'm listening to the same song in my little MP3 player. I'm putting my key into the door of my dorm house. That's when I hear as if he's standing and talking directly into my ear without there being an earbud in the way, and it was that same voice. "Are you still listening to that crap?" I'm alone, like alone. Probably isn't another person out in the snow at about 10 p.m. or at least half a mile around me, even if I'm on campus. There's nobody who could have had said that, much less anybody standing next to me. And this isn't even the first time I'd listened to that song that day, so it wasn't my MP3 player either. Can't help but laugh and say, "Piss off, it's my tunes." And I go to my room. And now I have 2 ghost stories to tell. I don't know if it's a ghost, but I have a similar voice in my head at all times in regards to music. Big boots upstairs. This is something that happened around 3 or 4 years ago. I still occasionally think of it to this day, and now, being in my early 20s, I just can't explain. My home was built around the late 50s or maybe early 60s. It's not incredibly old, with little to no history, except for the fact that it's near a 100-year-old farm that sits on the hill near the house, and it's near a patch of woods. Ever since I was little, I've always felt uneasy being in the basement. You have your stereotypical wooden steps that creak and moan every time you step down. The cold draft that leaks into the cracked windows, making the basement colder than it already is. Dark corners of the basement where the light never seems to reach. And this was, and it pretty much is, one of my biggest fears of the basement as well. Never being able to see if someone was lurking in the dark corner and having that unnerving feeling that someone's watching you. The door leading down to the basement is located in the back of the house, so you'd have to do some walking to get there. This comes into play later in the story. There's no room upstairs to have the washer and dryer, so I have to resort to doing laundry in the basement. And this also will come into play later. So enough of the backstory, let's get into this. I've always been the maid of the house, by choice anyway. So I'm the one who does the basic cleaning, like cleaning the floors, washing the dishes, and you guessed it, doing the laundry. It was around 2 or 3 o'clock, and my mom and brother had already left for work. My mom had left at 10 that morning, my brother at around 1:30. I had a job at the time as well, but I had the day off. Now, ever since I've woken up that morning, I was already feeling uneasy. Maybe it was because I'd woken up to an empty house or something else entirely. I knew I was alone, and I had at least maybe 2 hours by now. I'd gathered all the laundry from the bedrooms and took them all to the basement. That's where the washer and dryer are located, like I said. So I have my back facing the dark corner of the basement, and I already loathed it with a passion. I'd not started the washer yet, and I was sorting through the colored clothes versus the whites. The house was dead silent at this point until I heard a thump upstairs right above my head. Now keep in mind that I have 2 cats, but at the time they were both downstairs in the basement with me. And since they like to follow me around while I do chores around the house, and this thump had startled me so badly, stopped me right in my tracks from what I was doing. I waited for another noise to see if it would happen again, and it didn't. Wanted to see if it would happen again, and it just didn't. It was silent again, and in my mind I had figured maybe something had accidentally fell to the floor from a shelf in the kitchen. It was right above my head. I went back to sorting through the clothes until I heard another thump, but this time it was very heavy footsteps. Very heavy footsteps indeed. Sounded like my brother's boots. And he always wears cowboy boots, so I assumed that maybe he had come home from work, maybe he had forgotten something, or maybe there was no work for him to do that day. So he came home early, which has happened before. I walked to the steps leading upstairs and called out my brother's name. I called once, I waited, I called twice. Still no answer. At this point, I was a little freaked out already than I was before, and Usually my brother would have answered by now. But all I was left with was silence. Dead silence. It was a few seconds of nothing until the footsteps started again. Only this time they were louder and faster. They were heading straight for the basement steps toward me. I froze, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the cats freaking out and running behind the dryer to hide. I had just wanted to run with them, and at this point I thought I was dealing with an intruder that was pinpointing the location of my voice. The footsteps had only gotten louder and louder until I had heard thunder, or what sounded like thunder, like a big boom. Then the footsteps just stopped, right in front of the doorway at the top of the basement stairs. If it was an intruder or my brother or a person, I would have saw somebody standing there. Nothing. I saw nothing but emptiness where somebody should have been standing. This part of the story still gives me chills and a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. Someone or something had stepped down into the first step. My body had then decided to move, to run. I had fled to the farthest wall of the basement and pulled out my phone and called my brother. He answered after the second ring. I was in hysterics at this point. My brother could tell something was bothering me. He asked what was wrong, and I had then proceeded to ask if he had come home, and if he was screwing with me and pulling a prank. He was confused and asked why I was asking him this because he was in the break room of his workplace waiting to punch in. I was cold, and I had froze again because even though I already knew at that point that no one was in the house, my brother was at work, and I knew for a fact that my mother was also at work, and it was just me. I told my brother that I would call him back later on his lunch break to explain a few hours, and we hung up. I was met with silence again, but my cats were still cowering behind the dryer. And suddenly, there was a faint whistle in the dark corner of the basement, which was now to my left. Blood ran cold, and my fight-or-flight instincts told me to run and run now. I had grabbed both of my cats, and I booked it outside. I forgot to mention that there is a door down to the basement that leads outside. Fled out and had peered up to the window to see if there really was someone in the house with me. Nothing. I was still alone. Got into my car that was sitting in the driveway and sat my cats down in the back seat. I had noticed that it was a clear sunny day, so the apparent thunder I had heard from earlier was unexplainable. Hesitantly, after about 30 minutes, I mustered up the courage to go back into the house. With my cats through the front door, which, by the way, was still locked, I had unlocked it with a hidden house key underneath some rocks near the garden that only my brother, my mother, and myself had knowledge of. I walked in, and the house felt fine at this point. It felt normal and no longer heavy. No longer felt uneasy. And to this day, I cannot explain the big heavy boot steps that I heard, and the ones that came down after me. I cannot explain the boom-like thunder I heard. I still have never explained fully what happened that day to my brother. Never told my mother either. Out of fear of, I guess, accidentally manifesting the event again and worrying her. And to this very day, I no longer go down to the basement to do laundry unless I have music playing in my earbuds to block out any noise to distract me. Always keep a close eye on the dark corner of the drafty basement and the creaky wooden steps, based on my personal events. My on-campus home is haunted. Advice. I moved on campus 3 weeks ago at university, and I think my block may be haunted. For context, the blocks are made up of 4 separate shares, 2 in the bottom, 2 in the top, and each share has 5 bedrooms and 2 common spaces. During week 1, I was the first to move into my share. I immediately felt like I was being watched, and like there was a physical presence in the air. That's not really an uncommon feeling for me, and chalked it up to being nervous. During the second week, another roommate moves in. When it's dark outside around 7 p.m., I'm alone in the kitchen making dinner. I still feel this presence, and I start to see a tall, shadowy figure in the corner of my eye, peering in the hallway to the bedroom or behind me in the living space. When I turn, it's gone, but I get goosebumps and feel distinctly like there's some sort of presence behind me. It happens across multiple days throughout the week, different times throughout the day. Always at night, though. I've also seen the silhouette of a cat in a similar manner, which seemed so lifelike that I had to follow it behind the couch to check if it was real or not. Although I've only seen the cat twice. Since that week, 2 other roommates have moved in. At night, we're usually around together, but when I'm alone, I feel the presence of this thing watching me. Although I haven't seen it again. It doesn't feel menacing, but I'm freaked out by it. At night, around 12:30 a.m., I hear thuds on the cabinet in the kitchen and movement sounds. It could be my roommates, but I hear it nightly, usually in the early hours of the morning. Similarly, I usually have a lot of memorable dreams, but I've had none since I got here, which is even weirder. I've also woken up in the morning sweating heavily, and my bed's all messed up as if I've been moving a lot. However, I feel this thing's presence in the main rooms, pretty much there exclusively. I've spoken to the people who live directly above me, and none of them have had any similar experience. I'm not sure how to address the situation, or if there's anything I can do. While I do feel the presence of things, I can't see somewhat often, and I've never really seen anything like this. My family's inheritance. A ghost that follows the males in my family. All the males in my family had been haunted by a ghost, and when a male is born, it's passed to him. I, a 25-year-old male, am the most recent inheritor of this ghost. I'll start with the description of this ghost, and then get into my family's experiences with it. The ghost is around 5'9". It is a male figure, almost completely silhouetted, and its key feature are its gray reflective eyes. Think if you shine a light on a cat's eyes, but it, being the ghost, reflects a grayish color instead of a green and yellow. This is how myself, my dad, grandfather, and great-grandfather all described it. I'll start with stories from my great-grandfather. These encounters have been told to me verbally from my grandfather, and since my great-grandfather has long since passed. My great-grandfather's first encounter with this ghost occurred when he was in his 20s. He was living with his parents, and he was asked to take out the trash to the curb. He brought out the garbage can, walked back inside his house, and when he entered, he looked down the hallway and saw the ghost. It was just standing there staring at him. He froze, watched the ghost sidestep around a corner, and my great-grandfather went to investigate. Found nothing. The second encounter happened around a year before his son, my grandfather, was born. He was in his garage building a cabinet. When he was working, a figure appeared at his peripheral. As he looked toward the figure, who he thought was his wife, it vanished. He stopped working, walked inside, asked his wife if she had been in the garage, and she said no. My grandfather only had one experience, and for context, he's a very practical man. He says the ghost was in the attic. He was looking for his Christmas tree, and he saw the ghost in the corner of the room with its arms folded. He was spooked, said a couple of curse words. The ghost then unfolded its arms and walked into the wall and ceiling. And my dad, he's a special case. He had one encounter, while his friend, not being blood-related, also had an encounter. My dad's encounter was fairly generic. Saw the ghost at the end of a hallway, went to investigate but found nothing. However, his friend's encounter was apparently horrifying. My dad, being around 20, was away with his family for a beach trip. He had his friend look after the house while they were gone. While enjoying his trip, he gets a call from his friend. His friend said that he's not to be looking after the house, or rather will not be looking after the house anymore because he saw some creature standing in the living room. He was clearly shaken up and crying over the phone. My dad and his family returned to the house and found his friend crying on the front porch. The police were called to search the house and found nothing. And his friend drew a picture of the creature, which was the ghost, and he had it tucked away in his attic till this day. His friend refuses to talk about what he saw, no matter how hard I pry. I've had two experiences. My first encounter was in high school, 16 years old. I saw it standing in my closet. I was looking at my phone. I yelled at it so loud where my parents came into my room. Told them about it. My dad seemed to understand the situation, while my mom seemed confused by how my dad was relatively unbothered. My second encounter was much different. I was laying in bed watching videos, and it appeared in the corner of my eye. It was just standing next to a shelf. I had it in the corner of my room, and I freaked out, threw a pillow at it, and just charged at it, throwing my whole body weight into it. Backed away, and it was gone. My mom and sister came into my room asking what happened, and I explained what happened. They understood and then left. Really want to know if anybody else has a sort of inherited ghost. In my family's history, there was a man who murdered his wife, and part of me thinks he might be the ghost that haunts us. Let me know what you think. If you have any experience with the ghost haunting your family, especially so. My experiences with unknown entities. Well, I was about 23. I lived in a super old house that sat in the middle of a very big vacant lot, which was closed off by a big chain-linked fence. Growing up, I had some creepy experiences here and there, but the experiences I had in this house could never compare. There was always a dark cloud hanging over it. Anyone who came over immediately felt the gloom, and as soon as they stepped into the house, and anybody who stayed the night would wake up feeling someone staring at them. Not just staring, they'd feel harassed and frightened over it. Some people would see black shadows out of the corners of their eye, and a couple of times the bathroom faucet would turn on randomly while someone was in there relieving themselves. I've had friends run out screaming because they were in complete shock. Anyway, the person who lived with me was out pretty much every night partying, so I was home alone a lot when the sun would go down. Every now and again I'd hear knocks at the front door, my bedroom door, but when I opened them, no one would be there. I'd hear a whisper here, a whisper there, maybe creaks, maybe footsteps. And eventually I started having night terrors. I had sleeping problems for about a year because I'd wake up either screaming with somebody on top of me holding me down, or both. I'd see and I'd hear things if I tried to go back to sleep. One night a friend stayed over with me, and when we woke up the next morning, all the desk drawers were stacked on top of the desk in my bedroom. I asked her what happened, and she said, "You don't remember?" No, obviously I did not. She told me she woke up to me standing at the bedroom door facing out. She asked what I was doing, and I didn't answer. She asked if I was okay, and no answer again. And finally she yelled my name and turned around and started pulling the drawers out of the desk, just sort of setting them on top of it. She said she was too creeped out to do anything, so she just watched. When I was done, I went right back to bed and was suddenly asleep. There was another time I was home alone watching a movie in my room. I hear a knock at the front door, so I go to answer it. No one was there. As soon as I closed the door, there were more knocks, harder and louder. I just kept a baseball bat next to my bed, so I grabbed it and opened the door again. Walked around the lot, and there's no one. Fence still locked. I went back inside my bedroom, locked the door, and as soon as I did that, I heard a crash in the kitchen. At this point, I was like, why the fuck not? So I grabbed the bat and went to the kitchen. Every cabinet was wide open, and all my pans were scattered across the floor. Grabbed my car keys, drove to the 24-hour Walmart. I stayed there until the sun came up. Then I went back home, cleaned up the kitchen, and just exited after that. Then I had some friends in a band, and they'd come over to practice and party every now and again. We'd video record and play it back after, and you could see orbs flying across the screen like crazy, hear noises like static or distortion in the back, and not feedback from the amps either. Things would fall off the walls randomly. The radio or TV would turn on by themselves, and this would happen when people were over too. After a couple of years, it just became more like an attraction than anything scary to me. I forgot what it felt like to live in a normal, lightweight home. The dark vibe became normal to me, until I moved a few years later. I'll never live in a space that feels heavy ever again. Haunting at a brand new house. One family member is still in denial. The other 4 refuse to talk about it. I'm just wondering how it's possible for a brand new house to be haunted. We were the first house on the lot and had moved a couple states away. My dad went up first and then he picked me up. The first night I was there, my dad had heart attack symptoms and went to the ER and they found nothing. Then the rest of my family moved up. Don't have a specific order of events, but I'll try to sum it up by experiences I heard or witnessed personally. My mom and dad, they would hear sounds of rubbing against the inside of the walls. Not only that, they would also hear voices whisper as they slept. My dad heard several voices, and when he started to open his eyes, the voices said shh, and then ended. My mother one time fell down a flight of stairs. It was as if her feet got kicked out from under her. My infant sister had a baby monitor, and my parents would hear something talking to her, like hitting her, and just cry out of nowhere. The worst time, you could hear her getting slapped, and my parents couldn't open the door. After forcing it open, she had red hand marks on both cheeks. My brother had an old mirror in his closet, and it used to be on the dresser, but it was too tall to fit into the bedroom, so they just took it off. One night my brother just had his closet opened and claims to have seen a demon coming out of the mirror trying to get him. He ran in terror to my room, and me, being half asleep, told him to go back to bed. Moved the mirror out and seemed to not have issues with the closet opening. For me, it started when I hid in my closet for a long time in the dark while playing hide and seek. I started coughing hard mucus to the point I was coughing blood for about a year. Couldn't get it to stop with pills or inhalers, and it just stopped about a year later. I now have reduced air function in my lungs. Next things would move first, like objects would be missing. They'd be misplaced, and then it started playing with my radio. The radio had knobs of the volume that you had to physically turn, and the light read out so you could see the volume and all that at night. I would often sleep with my radio on. I would turn the volume slowly to get my attention to fly to full blast. I'd have to jump up, turn the volume down, turn my light off for it to stop. I next started having dreams of myself in the house, unable to leave the room I'm in. Doors would be unlocked but stuck closed, and in my dreams I would try the lights and the switch would flip up but no light would come on. If you did open the door in the dream, the lights wouldn't work in the other rooms, and no one would be there except me. The dreams were a shared experience, and my brother and sister also experienced them. The strangest experience was I was folding towels and bedding in the sort of closet facing the stairs. My dad and I heard and saw a figure running full speed up the stairs to my brother's room and slamming the door. Opened his door, no one's there, went downstairs, and he's in the middle of washing dishes. No way it was him. Before the incident, my sister just had grabbed a couch by the side of the road. My mother discovered a reddish-brown stain that wouldn't go away. And after the incident with my sister, we got rid of the couch, and my dad did some kind of cleansing ritual with the Bible and glasses of white vinegar. I'm not sure what he spoke in Spanish, and he then put the glass somewhere that couldn't be disturbed and put it underneath my bed. I had a custom-built bed frame with shelves and a center compartment. That's where it sat. And months later, it solidified. Me being curious, brought the cup to my science teacher, added a sample of it to the dish, and it grew black mold. Which is odd, because we didn't have black mold at my house. Maybe it picked up some spores between cleaning. After the ritual, the activity drastically dropped. However, we'd still get the dreams, misplaced things, and touching my radio continued at random times. My thoughts on it, after some research, this area was an area of conflict during the Western expansion days. And the Ward massacre happened only a town over. Who knows what kind of unknown slaughters could have happened. There's also a graveyard 2 blocks away, as well as a very dangerous stretch of highway with plenty of accidents. And it could be a portal for lost spirits. It could also be a poltergeist, the time spent at the house for my teen years, as well as a bitter divorce between my parents. My father is a bit tough and strict in the house, with no stranger to anger and violence, as well as sadness. And then my mom lived there, went to college, got away for a time. Help me explain this event. Around 2006, my family moved to southwest England, moved into a detached home in a medieval city. I was around 11 at the time, and my older sister was 13. We lived with our mother and father. We were only made aware after we moved in that house that it was known to the locals as a paranormal house. We actually had builders and renovators straight up refuse to work on the house after we told them the address. We were also told the house was being sold by a couple who were in the middle of a divorce. But it wasn't until years later that we discovered the house had been empty for years before we moved in. I'm not sure if that's important to know, but thought I'd mention it. Anyway, there's a lot of peculiar incidents that happened in the house whilst we were there. Doors jamming, random knocks and bangs. Our dog physically refused to walk up the steps to the house and seemed very uncomfortable when we first moved in. But we all put that down to it being a new home, and that there was always an explanation. So, throughout the years living there, a lot of people experienced weird and unexplainable things that happened. Although I witnessed some pretty weird stuff, there was one night that will always stay with me. Something that I just try as I might, I really can't explain. So I'm reaching out to Reddit in order to give me some clarity to that evening, if that's even possible. It was 2010. My parents are now separated. My sister was staying with my friends, so it was just me and my father in the house. It was the middle of the night and we were both asleep, when I was woken by the sound of a radio going off on the top floor of the house. It started off quiet, but it was as if somebody had their finger on the volume. It suddenly went from quiet and grew to as loud as it could get. My dad, obviously irritated, thought it was me staying up late playing music. I heard him get out of bed, shouting to turn the music down as he went upstairs where the noise was coming from. I remember hearing him go silent mid-sentence, the radio turning off and the footsteps going downstairs as he went back to bed. Of course, I was rattled at the strange occurrence, and our dog wasn't allowed upstairs and we had no other pets. so there's no other normal explanation to how the radio could have turned itself on like that. I attempted to go back to sleep, but after about 20 minutes I was woken again by the sound of the radio turning on, the sound going from quiet to loud in a matter of seconds. I was paralyzed in my bed, terrified of what was going on. So I heard my dad get out of bed and go to the sound of the radio, which was now coming from my sister's empty bedroom. She was at the sleepover. Except, when he opened her door, there was a sudden loud crash. I jumped out of bed, turned on my bedroom light, and ran to my sister's room to see what the noise was. My dad was stood by the door, and on the floor was the radio still playing, but about 4 feet across the room from where it was usually on her desk. It was as if somebody had thrown the radio from her desk. My dad's not really somebody who believes in the paranormal, but even I could tell that he was a bit shocked. After a few seconds, he picked up the radio and unplugged it, placed it back on my sister's desk, told me to go back to bed, and we never spoke of it again. Didn't even tell my sister. I know that there's an explanation for bumps in the night and stuff like that, but I've never really been able to come up with a reason to this. I welcome any suggestions, and should also say that they were both the same iPod dock and radio that both me and my sister had been gifted a couple of years prior. We kept those speakers and radios for years and never experienced anything like that again. Mini ghost stories. This one starts when I was younger, maybe around 10. I was at my aunt's house and no one was home. I was home alone and I was in one of the rooms in my aunt's house, sort of just doing whatever. I suddenly heard a deep voice in my ear, and it said, "Jenna," my actual name. Another time in this house, I'm down in the basement and I'm coming up the stairs, and once I reached the basement door that was opened, the door slapped shut in my face. The second story starts with, being in the house I'm currently living in. There's a bunch of experiences here. I was down in the basement doing laundry, and as I was coming up the basement steps, I could hear the steps I already passed creak behind me like somebody was walking behind me. Once I got fully upstairs into the living room that's above the basement, it sounded like down in the basement somebody was throwing things around and making a bunch of random loud-ass noises. Another instance in this house I experienced was I was in the living room with my toddler and older brother. My toddler was playing and my brother and I were sitting on the couch talking. Out of nowhere, the front door handle started twisting and rattling fast. It was like somebody was trying to come into the house. I opened the front door, nobody there. I actually had the same thing happen with my bedroom doorknob at night. I would ask people in my house if they were trying to come in my room, and they would all deny it and kind of act confused. Another time would be in the middle of the night. My son would be sleeping in our room, and I'd be laying in bed, and all this light-up music toys would go off randomly, multiples at once. The most recent thing that happened in this house was I'm really not sure what the hell it was. In my room with my bedroom door open, and I could see out of my bedroom into the hall. And out of the corner of my eye, I can see a silhouette of a man walk out of my brother's bedroom that was next to mine. Obviously, I think it's my brother, so I walk out of my bedroom to go ask a question. When I get to the kitchen, that I seen what I assumed was my brother walking towards, he's not there. And might I add, my son and I were the only ones home. Go to my brother's room confused and ask if he left his room, and he said no. The last instance of experiencing something in this house would be I was on FaceTime with my boyfriend. Had the phone positioned at me, but he could see behind me, and this was at night. He was randomly talking about who knows what when he got this nervous look in his face. I asked him what was wrong. He told me that he saw what looked to be a tall black silhouette of a man appear in the wall behind me. There's been many times in my bedroom at night where I'll be laying in bed as my toddler is almost asleep, sometimes already asleep. I would see this black shadow appear and then disappear. It would disappear when I would sit up and try to look closer. This is an experience where I lived in Indiana with my ex. We was driving at night, and we was arguing in the car in a back road, and my ex pulled over randomly in this back road to talk. While we was talking, we heard something randomly hit the car. A couple minutes later, after being silent to see if we heard anything else, we heard a slightly loud scream, and then something or someone sobbing. There's no one around, and we got the hell out of there. Another experience would be when my son was born and I was still living in Indiana. So I'm alone with my son, who was a newborn. We both had COVID. His quote-unquote dad left to go get medicine. I went home alone. My son was sleeping, and I'm just awake scrolling on my phone, and this house had a basement. And all of a sudden, it sounded like somebody was running up and down the steps of the basement, like constantly. The second my ex came and just walked through the front door, it stopped. Third story would be at my now boyfriend's house. It was our 1-year anniversary, and I wanted to surprise him by showing up. He lives 2 hours away, and he didn't think I'd be able to make it that day. He was working, and plan was for a show to show up before he got off from work, which I did. I want to mention that he's told me he believes his house is haunted by a man that he calls Toby. He's had his own experiences with Toby. Anyways, I was there by myself waiting for him to get off work, and I was cleaning around his house. I was keeping myself busy, and suddenly I kept getting this overwhelming feeling of something else was being there. Random noises started happening. I swore I seen these things from the corner of my eye, and when I would fully look, it would just vanish. The one that really got me was when I was walking out of his front door to go to my car for something. As soon as I went to reach the front door handle, the door blew open in front of me. His neighbors had to think I'm nuts because I kept running out of his house multiple times from being scared, and then eventually going back in. When my boyfriend got home, I told him what happened, and he laughed and said, "It was probably Toby messing with you." The Girl on the Stairs. I grew up in a village in UK. It's known for its history with windmills, an old manor house, pubs that are hundreds of years old, and it was mentioned in a Domesday book. Maybe Doom. I lived on a road that backs into the manor. Multi-million-pound house that at some point would have been owned by somebody with some importance in the village. And that night when I was 12, probably around 1 a.m., I woke up needing the toilet. I got up, crossed the landing, glanced downstairs, and at the bottom, I saw a little girl stood there. Thinking it was my younger sister and completely ignoring the nightgown that she wore, went to the toilet, and I just crossed back to the bedroom and noticed she's gone. 7 years later, I was having a summer barbecue in the back garden whilst my parents were on holiday. My then girlfriend had invited some college friends to come along. We're sitting outside at probably 11 p.m. That's when one of her friends, who I'd only met twice, came running outside while I was being white as a sheet, really. She looked about and out of breath said, "You're all here?" as if it surprised her. She continued, "I've just followed a little girl up the stairs, but she disappeared." We all sat in silence, a bit freaked out. Turns out that apparently the daughter of the manor, several hundred years prior, had been picking apples in the orchard and slipped, trapping her between the branches and breaking her neck. And finally, one night whilst I'd returned from university for the holidays, my parents and siblings were out of the house. I was alone other than a cat. I was was talking with my girlfriend on MSN Messenger when my bedroom door with a very stiff door handle opened. No explanation, I drive off and I just look into the landing, and there was no one. I called out and there also was no one. And since then, when I visit my parents, I try to avoid crossing the landing late at night, in case I come face to face with the same girl that I and my ex-friend saw. Strange bruises after waking up screaming. A few nights ago, I remember waking up screaming, having this feeling of dread and violation. Couldn't remember anything from the dream, though. Well, the next morning I woke up with these strange bruises. They look almost like a larger handprint. 4 fingers on the forearm and a thumb on the back of my arm. The strangest part is I have almost identical bruises on both arms. They're in the same spots, give or take a couple centimeters. One arm has all 4 fingers and the thumb, and the other only 2 and a thumb. They're deep bruises, painful to touch and bright purple and blue, slowly yellowing to the outside of the bruise. Then last night, my dog kept twisting his head around his body and thought he was looking straight at me. I was the big spoon, he was the little spoon facing away from me. And then he would twist his neck around only to his head and be facing me and like he was trying to look at me in the face. Then I realized he wasn't making eye contact with me. He was looking right behind me like there was some sort of stimuli behind me in bed. What do you think this could be? Am I in trouble here? And by the way, for possible context, I've been sort of stuck in a spiritual emergency for 9 months now. Woke up one day, realized that reality is not what I thought it was. Mundane day to day, working 9 to 5 and trying to find some sort of a career success was not all there was to life. Woke up and realized there is a spiritual realm, spiritual self that may actually be real, and suddenly I realized the depth of that thought. I've since developed a short telepathy of precognition, or maybe just really strong intuition. Things like sensing my best friend's miscarriage, coming and waking up right before my alarm goes off and thinking, ugh, my alarm's about to go off. Like a literal second before it goes off every single day. We do have pretty accurate internal clocks, us humans. Never believed in much of these sorts of things, but I believe I saw and felt something last night in my bedroom. So last night, something very bizarre happened. Like, very bizarre. I've always been a logical-based lad, only believe what I can see with my 2 eyes, or logically making sense at least. I've always thought on this topic with ghosts and spirits and been like, I don't really believe it to exist. But if it does, there really isn't anything to do about it. They have as much right to be here as us, and kind of mostly believed it to be superstition. So, for information, I, a 21-year-old male, live very close to a graveyard and cemetery. I can look into it from my apartment even. Roughly 20 meters to it, and I've lived here for 4 or 5 years. And I have on multiple occasions walked through the cemetery at night, like after, 12 o'clock a.m., and just generally very late. But on the way home, nothing has ever happened. I've never really been disrespectful in there, just as a common decency, and I never really believed in the occult. Never been scared to go in there in late hours. But yesterday and today, Sunday the 16th of March at around 2-ish, I woke from a dream. I can usually force myself to wake up when I dream, especially if it gets uncomfortable. Like, when I dream, I can wake myself up. It's actually quite nice, but anyway. Had this weird dream where a snake or something tried to crush and suffocate me, which isn't a comfy feeling. So naturally I woke up, and I could still imagine this feeling when I woke up. I blinked a bit. I looked to the right of my bed, and that's where I see this slightly obscured figure. It resembled a human, a female human. I couldn't make out the face, and the hair and the body were undeniably human and female. Dark brown hair to just above the shoulder. I wouldn't say I was downright scared, but I was shocked and a bit worried. Stared at it for roughly 1 to 3 seconds, and then it disappeared. Like it flew almost obliquely through the ceiling, the way out to the street, and in the direction toward the cemetery. By the way, mind you, the room was very dark and I couldn't make out the details, but some of them. And she was sort of slightly translucent. I was just blankly staring at this point, thinking, what the fuck just happened? Turned my head back to look through the ceiling and made the sign of a cross. And by the way, I'm not religious either. And as I know a little Latin, I said, E nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, before looking at my phone to see the time. I don't know if this is just my imagination playing games or if it was sleep paralysis. Besides the fact that I was able to move, I'm really no longer certain about ghosts being superstition and religion fools believing it. Got to admit, anybody in here explain to me whether I saw and if it's a ghost or not? Or maybe simply my imagination doing tricks on me. Bad if it's real, but shouldn't I be worried? I think I took the whole thing quite chill, really. Didn't freak out or have any feelings of dread or fear, more like, what the fuck, I guess the paranormal stuff is true. I mumbled it to myself, even. Can anyone please help me out here, or at least share your thoughts? Skinwalker stories. I'm trying to do some research for a project about skinwalkers, wendigos, and doppelgangers, and their origins, sources of information, and people's experiences. The crazier the better. The main goal is learning people in and around North America's folklore. To make it even more perhaps, I have a bit of an easy story of a skinwalker myself. Disclaimer. I have no idea what I saw. I just described it to a friend, and a skinwalker was the term he used, and showed me a picture that both me and his wife, who was there with me, jumped out of our seats. It's because it was nearly a perfect representation of what we saw. And again, this is a super simple story. Late August last year, my wife and I decided to take a trip to Fredericksburg, in Texas, to celebrate our engagement. We were there for wine tasting, beer house, and cute knick-knack shopping. Casual vanilla fun stuff that we die for. If you haven't been and can go, it's great. We had a cabin rented out in the quote-unquote wash, I think they call it. It was like dry land surrounded by hills, and just imagine your typical dry western environment. Brown hills and trees, random cacti everywhere, and signs saying no burning. It's all scattered around the property and next to a fire pit, which we thought was pretty hysterical. We were on our way back past 10 p.m. from downtown. And we had these things that we called cow roads to get back to the cabin because there were cattle scattered on both sides of the road and all the gates were open and you'd have to kind of wait for them to cross every now and then. We joked the cows own these roads and we're just tourists. This is all to say that we were driving slowly because, God forbid, a cow walked in front of us and basically totaled my Jeep, but worse, possibly hurt or kill someone's cow and left us open to what happened next. We were talking, laughing, making jokes, and trying not to focus on how it was sort of pitch black around us. My convertible top was down and we just felt vulnerable. But in front of us was this black figure on the left side of the road. Dirt road, mind you. Not very wide, maybe a car and a half. It was on all fours and had this short body, long legs and massive head, and was black. And as we got closer, there was a hue mixing of black and gray to its skin. It was kind of hard to tell if it was fur or skin. I wasn't nervous, but I slowed down because I didn't want to hit this thing. Thought it was some sort of a wolf or coyote thing, and we were maybe over 500 feet away and getting closer. And by the time I could really look at it, it was in the middle of the road, and we were even closer, literally a stone's throw away, and it turned to face. But as it turned, it stood up and what we thought were back legs, but just human-like, because this thing like flat up stood and looked at us and turned back the way it came. But went back to the all fours as it walked. When it faced us, its eyes, which glowed yellow, I remember wolves glowing red. I could still be wrong about that. But that added to my confusion in the moment, as this thing looked so off, and we realized its short body was more like our torso, and it moved so awkwardly. It's because it really was like a person walking on all fours, but its head was a thing of nightmares. That's all I know. It looked right at us. Had my brights on, so maybe it actually was blinded and just left, but I was scared enough to think it looked right at me. Started driving off, and my wife didn't say a word for a few minutes. That felt like forever. She started to say, "Did you?" And I just said, "Yep." That was before she could finish her sentence. If she wasn't there to confirm it, I would have thought it was just a trick of the night and I needed to go to bed. Like I said, easy story that leaves me wanting to learn more about these things and, well, not be where a Bigfoot guy, or rather, not to be a where's Bigfoot guy, but kind of. Just genuinely interested to see what others have seen to know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought skinwalkers were, and Arizona, New Mexican culture. I think it's just Native American in general, sir. The phone call, December 2016. I, a 24-year-old female, lived in rural Victoria, Australia, with my mom and my older brother, who's 5 years older than me. And for context, my mother's side is Italian, and my nana is very superstitious. Needle and thread to determine the sex of your future children, and I've had this done multiple times. 2 girls and a boy. It would correctly identify my auntie's children who were already born, and the needle would still be on any man who would try. It's not supposed to work on men. As well as the bowl full of water and dropping oil into it to breed curses and jealousy. So when I was 14-ish, one of the mother's best friends, Jen, died of a heart attack. I had known this woman my whole life, and used to live down the road when my parents were together. Our family was heartbroken and felt negativity toward the husband as Jen had a heart attack late at night in bed. It was next to her husband, to which he woke up and just ran to the neighbor to help, or to ask for help rather, before returning and starting to do chest compressions. That was while she was still in bed, and even at 15 I knew he needed a hard service for chest compressions to be useful. Jen unfortunately passed away in that bed, 12/12/15. About a year later, myself, Mom, and my brother were sitting at our kitchen table after finishing dinner. My mom was recounting ghost stories. Faces in the window of her bedroom, her grandfather walking the hallway at night when my mother got up to use the bathroom. And keep in mind, she grew up on a farm with at least 2 long paddocks separating the house from the road and had dogs barked at pretty much everything. My mom mentioned that she could still feel Jen with her in her heart. We all recounted fond memories of Jen. Suddenly, the only light above her head started to flicker and went out briefly. The light of the TV with MASH on mute was staying on, as well as our Christmas tree. We're used to power cutting out for short periods of time on stormy nights here, but this night was in the midst of summer, eerily quiet despite our house being next to a truck route. Also so happened to be the week of the first anniversary of Jen's passing. Our family was silent during the seconds the light flickered out and continued to be silent when the light came back on. The kitchen felt breezy, and I could see that we all had goosebumps. My brother and I began to laugh the whole thing off, and that's when my mother's phone rung. She pointed the phone screen at us, and my brother and I smiled. It was Jen's number. My mother answered the phone, and after a minute of silence, the call was ended. We all sat in silence together for minutes until my brother and I pushed out of our seats saying, "Nope, nope, nope," repeatedly. My mother clutched the phone to her chest and cried silently. My brother and I were pretty freaked out, so we stayed pretty much with Mom in the lounge. And that was the first and only night our family watched MASH. A woman in pink pants. A long time ago, when I was in high school, I had a friend over and I had a sleepover. He went to the bathroom, came back running very quickly, saying he saw a woman in a mirror. I think he was just playing, but he had to stay outside when he was peeing because he was scared. I didn't see anything. Some years later, I had sleep paralysis experience, and this woman wearing a white t-shirt and pink pants entered the room calling my name. I couldn't answer it because you get literally paralyzed and voiceless. She approached me, touched my head, and kept calling my name again to no answer. She gave up, walked out of the room, and as soon as she did, I woke up panting. Got up, went searching for the house, and I saw nothing. Nothing except a medicine box that was on the table that was on the floor, which was kind of weird, but okay. I told the story to some people, but they said I was just dreaming. Years passed, and I'm chilling in my room with my girlfriend in the summer. I have the table fan on. The door of the wardrobe was moving due to the wind of the fan, so my girlfriend asked me to turn it off. I jokingly said that it wasn't the fan that was moving the door, but rather the woman in pink pants was playing with the door. As soon as I said that, the table fan dropped from the table and broke. Anybody have any explanation for it? Not the fan thing, because that was probably a coincidence, but for the sighting. This is my ghost story. So I'll begin by giving some background on myself, since I believe it could have something to do with the incident at least. I've always had a powerful sort of intuition. Not psychic or clairvoyant, but maybe something close. I can just sense things before learning the facts or the truth, and I've had strange experiences my whole life. When I was younger, I would get this rush of euphoria, and for lack of a better word, love out of nowhere. And for no reason almost. It was always very intense and lasted for several minutes. It was a good experience. It felt like I was wrapped in the embrace of something powerful. I felt complete euphoria and happiness and a sort of energy that was extremely powerful. When this would happen, it was like the world around me seemed brighter as well. Like there was some sort of a light that was being emitted from within everything. Much like an aura, but even coming from inanimate objects. This is really best as I can describe it. It felt as though there was a presence, but I can't be certain. Never actually saw anybody or anything of note besides the increased brightness of the world around me, and it was just weird. These incidents have always kind of stuck out of my mind, but for whatever reason I haven't had a similar experience as I was a child. The last one I can remember was when I was in first grade. However, that was just the most powerful one of them all. I remember it vividly. I've always just felt different in a way I can't quite describe. Not in a way that makes me, special or anything. I don't want to come off as believing that I'm somehow special or better. I've just noticed I think differently, and I have always been a very deep and philosophical person, especially as I got older. But I had deep thoughts and opinions as a child, too. They remained with me my entire life, and still feel this way now as an adult. I've always been a searcher, one who's constantly searching for the meanings behind life and how everything functions. So at this story, there was sort of a build-up to this actual event, and it began as something simple, but weird nonetheless. I noticed that when I was lying in bed, it felt like my bed was slightly shaking. At first, I'm just dismissing it as being in my head, but as time went on, I became more and more certain that it was actually happening. Started paying more attention to it as a result, and after a while, I began to feel something pressing on my back from within the mattress. No, it sounds crazy, but that's what it felt like. I tried my damnedest to ignore it and tell myself I was imagining it, but it continued. Night after night, I felt what seemed like arms and hands lightly pushing up on the... almost inside the mattress. Tried lying completely still, focusing on something in my room, and I could see whether or not if I was actually being pushed upwards. And to my surprise, I think I was. I could actually see my view of, the item changing as I was pushed slightly upward. I was baffled. Never been a believer or been a religious person. I always found a logical explanation or dismissed things as being my own imagination. But this was different. Couldn't dismiss this as just my imagination, and I was certain I could feel and see myself move. It was real. I chose to ignore it and hope it ended, and I even began to wonder if I was losing my mind. During this time, I started having nightmares of being chased and shot, which were extremely vivid. I felt the emotions and fear like I was actually there, and when shot, I felt the pain and burning of a bullet ripping through my back. Even felt the heat of the bullet. I can remember the setting just as well as if it had actually had me spending time there. The place seemed familiar, and I can't place it. I can only feel that I know this place somehow. I also experienced several events where I would wake up in a sheer panic. I'd be consumed by fear, trapped in my room, which is usually dark, but by dark I mean completely pitch black to where literally I couldn't see my way around my room. During these events, I would jump up out of bed, frantically struggle to find my way to the door using just my hands. And I'm beginning to feel very uncomfortable just talking about this part. I'm reminded of the fear and panic I felt, and it turns my stomach into a knot. It was one of the worst experiences in my life, and I hope I never experience it ever again. I can remember finding the door and collapsing to my knees once I was out of the door into the hallway. It took me days to get rid of the feeling and get right again, and to get it out of my head enough to sleep. But I dreaded the nights for a long time. Still have to have a light in my room to this day, and I'm over 40 years old. Not something I'm proud to say, and it does make me feel weak. Now is the main event. So I remembered that I had been experiencing the same shaking of my bed and pushing before falling asleep that night. I had fallen asleep for some time, but I'm not really sure how long now. I have a tendency to wake up multiple times a night, and this night was no different. This is going to sound cliche, but I woke at around maybe 3 a.m. and was laying in bed thinking. Not really sure that the time has any bearing on the story, though. But I've wondered if I did, maybe. Perhaps the veil in between our world and the world beyond is truly thinner at this time. I remember I was wide awake and I was considering turning the TV on, and that's when this pushing on my back started up. Only this time it was stronger than usual. I thought I could feel individual fingers. At this point, I'm kind of over the whole thing, and I'm beginning to get angry and frustrated, and as a result, I started kind of pushing back by shifting my weight and using my arms. And due to this, it seemed to stop for a time. So, turned on the TV, started watching Adult Swim. But suddenly I felt something else. I felt like something had risen out of my mattress because it was brushing past my arm as it came out. I was confused, but I wasn't really concerned, because I just assumed in the moment it was my blanket or something. Nothing was visible, just the sensation. So suddenly it became clear that what it was, because I just felt a hand grab my left forearm tightly. I knew it was a hand because I could feel each finger as it clasped into my left arm. It wasn't cold or hot, it was just neutral, and all I felt was the pressure. Immediately freaked out, rolled off the bed and to the left with my closet doors on, and I remember my shock as my arm stayed firmly on the bed, but was able to rotate in the grip of the hand as I rolled, just like if somebody grabbed your arm and sort of hung on you as you struggled and turned to free yourself. I can remember thinking, this is all in your head, for about a moment. That's just before trying to pull my arm away, and when I did try to pull my arm back, it remained stuck to the bed. I could feel the grip tighten when I pulled it. That's when my fight or flight response really kicked in, and I chose fight. I began to punch as hard as I could where I thought my hand or arm to be, and in the dark of the room only lit by my television, it felt as though I was hitting something. The sensation I felt in my fist was strange, like punching squishy air. And after a few solid hits, I felt its hold release and my arms were finally free. Immediately turned on my bedside lamp and looked at my bed to find nothing. Nothing at all. Just empty sheets. I still struggle to understand this event, and I'm still trying to find ways to explain it to myself logically. I want to just brush it off as being something I imagined, but that's a lie. I know it wasn't just my imagination, it wasn't a dream either, and I know that deep down I've always been a believer in science and the tangible. Laughed in people's faces who told me they have faith. I've struggled with that my whole life, really, and my motto's always been, if you can't prove it, it's not real. Carl Sagan said it best when he said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. That's why I live my life by. I can't explain this, nor can I provide any proof beyond just my retelling of the story, and that eats me. When asked about my religious preferences, I always claimed agnostic. I'd been that way since a very young age, and I was around 4 or 5 years old when I decided I didn't believe in the church my family and I attended. Sweet dreams.